Hey everyone, this is MVArts. We started to get a basic understanding of what is necessary when shading a 3D model. Let's see if we can broaden that understanding by creating two of our own first self-made shaders. If you would like to follow along or just check out the end result to backwards engineer what I've done, you can download the project files on my website for free. At the time of this recording, it's a free website. I can host my downloads there. The link is in the description and I will update that if it would change. I apply the mirror modifier because we don't want our two sides to be symmetrically shaded. So you can do the same for your scene. Or use the shading _end.blend. In this file, I made sure to package the UVs after applying the mirror modifier, with Ctrl A for scale to proportion and Ctrl P for package. I'll quickly run through them shaders one by one. The Diffuse Shader is a base color with a gradient shadow, so basic shading. We could input color, roughness and normal. Using Shift S to switch out the diffuse node for a glossy one. Glossy is a reflection layer. With the roughness setting set to 0, it would be like a mirror. With the roughness amped up, it'll look more like brushed or sanded. Of course, we can adjust the color here too. The emission shader we've seen before. It emits light in whatever color we choose. I switch it out for a subsurface scattering node. This is an effect seen in the thin parts of the body. Light bounces around in there and reflects the color of the interior. In this case, it's a reddish color that comes through. I have a tutorial on how to make a subsurface scattering map for characters. See if I could place a card somewhere here. The transparency node makes our meshes transparent. If you see black spots like these, then I suggest cranking up the light bounces for the transparency. Right here in the light paths, on the render tab that is. I like to think of translucency as a sort of mix between transparency and subsurface scatter. This happens when an object is diffuse but not dense enough to fully block the light. So on the back face it will pass through some of the lighting. Of course, here's an option to change the color as well. Which, now I've seen it, actually gives a nice look, don't you think? Staying in the see-through corner, the refraction node. This will let light pass through the mesh. And bending or breaking the light rays. The best known cases are crystals or prisms. Change the roughness for a view of frosted glass. For a true glass shader, we use the glass node. It's basically a mix of the refraction and the glossy node. Then the final one I almost forgot is the anisotropic shader. But what it does, it stretches the reflection in any set angle. We can set the strength and the angle as you see right here. Again, including a roughness parameter as well. Most of them are bundled into the principal shader. That doesn't mean you should forget about these other shaders, because every now and then you'll need something more than the principal can offer. Sometimes perfect PBR isn't what you're looking for. Before we start making up our own shaders, do some research. If we want to build up our shader from scratch, use reference and study what layers it has. For example, this car paint. From what I can tell, we got our base color coating. Over the base layer, we sprinkle some flakes of metallic particles. To seal off the first two layers and add some extra protection, a highly reflective layer is added. Go into edit mode for a mesh you want to shade. I'll do the forearm. Select the mesh with A. Over in the UV editor, go into the UV menu and export UV layout. Save it to your project folder. I usually make a texture folder for every new project. To tell Blender what parts of the mesh we want our materials assigned to, we can make a few masks. I like to compare these masks to a painting template. We cover up the parts we don't want to be painted. When we remove it, only the exposed parts are painted. We could then paint this map we just saved in Photoshop or similar, save it out and import it back into Blender. But I like to do it all in Blender. I will make a 3-in-1 mask, by lack of a better word. Let me just show you. In Blender, select the legs. We quickly make 3 materials and name them accordingly. Car paint, next Kevlar, and then press add new material. One more time, call this one soft cushion green. Now, select in edit mode the parts of the mesh that match with the materials. So these shin parts will be assigned to the car paint. If we select the upper leg, we can assign them to the Kevlar. And lastly, select this little cushiony thingy. I select one of them and press Shift G, then face region. This will select the similar meshes. Now assign the last material. Leave edit mode for now. On top of this material, I'll add an emission node. For the color, switch it to RGB and set it fully to blue by dragging the red and green channel to 0. Connect it to the output node. Go into the second material. We're gonna add an emission node once again. This time coloring it red. Maybe you see where this is going. Yes, we're gonna add a green emission shader to the third material. Now we have this gorgeous clown costume. In the image editor, we're adding a new image down here. Give this a name, id.legs RGB or something. Leave the width and height to 1024. That's plenty of resolution. Press OK to confirm. We're gonna bake these clown colors to the texture we just made, using the UVs we made in the previous video. Go into edit mode to see them. In the node editor, Shift A to add an image texture. That came out unusually wide. Let's shrink it down. Click on the image icon right here. In the list, look up the ID legs texture we just created. With Ctrl C, copy the image texture. Down here, I'm switching material slots. Paste with Ctrl V so we can add the texture here as well. Let's quickly do this for the other material as well. Before we press bake, check if we have the image texture selected in every material slot. I go quickly out of edit mode and make sure to select the mesh. Let's hit bake. Let it do its thing. After some waiting, we got our colorful texture image. In the image editor, press Shift S or go down to image and save as. Make sure to save the image somewhere, or else it might be gone the next time we open Blender. I'm gonna rename this material to RGB. This material doesn't need anything else except for the emission node. Let's make a new material instead. Get rid of these three here by clicking the minus a couple of times. Add a new material and name it something you like. I'll rearrange my workspace a bit. Now we have more space in the node editor. Why don't we start with the base color for the car paint? I got my own color palette up on the other screen, so I copy the hex code. Click the color, switch to hex, and paste while hovering over the text. A light blue color is now added. The base coating is not so shiny, so let's bring back the specular value. We could also bring in the roughness a bit. I like to amp up the IOR a tiny bit. What I also notice in a lot of metallic car paints is a slight bend in color on places where the angle of the plates curve. So I want to make a gradient of 3 colors. To make a gradient, I like to get a converter called color ramp. We can slide these arrows over the gradient to make it sharper or ease the gradient. With the plus sign, we can add a new color. Click on one of the arrows and then on the colored rectangle at the bottom of the node. Change its color to something you like. Like I said, I prepared a few colors. First I'm gonna grab the color of the principled. Click, then drag and drop the color here. Select another color arrow and pick a new color. And once more for a final color. If we preview this, we see the mesh is not at all colored in the gradient we wanted. This means that we need to do 2 things. The color ramp is a converter, so this means we need to feed it some information about the mesh, which in its turn will convert this information to the color gradient we picked. Shift A, go into input and choose layer weight. This node contains the Fresnel and facing value of the object. The angle in which the object is hit with light will determine the strength of the value. The white part being close to the end of the gradient, the dark parts favoring the opposite side. If we Ctrl Shift click again, the node will preview the facing value instead. I set the value to 0.6. We can grab the color ramp and place it over the line. When it lights up, we can let go. Now it snaps in between. Last thing to do is connect the color ramp to the base color input. Find some more room to work on the next bit. To make the flakes, we're gonna add in a noise texture. Shift A, texture and choose noise. With the noise node selected, press Ctrl T to add the mapping and texture coordinates. I want to switch the coordinates from generated because the noise texture might dance around over the mesh once we start animating. Instead, plug in the UV coordinates. We can turn up the scale a bit more, so that the noise pattern is getting smaller. To start, set it to 50. This will be up to your own judgment. We can make some more room for a converter node. Add converter color ramp. This time we'll leave it black and white. We could bring them closer to each other. So this will be our metallic map. This will determine what parts are flakes. I'll quickly disconnect by Ctrl Shift, then right click and drag over the line. If I slide the metallic value all the way up to 1, this would be a white input. On the other hand, a value of 0 would be a black input. This means that we need to flip the converter node. Connect the ramp to the input. I'll add another converter node to invert, because we might need both versions I expect. Shift A, converter, then color ramp. Click on the right arrow here. From the drop down menu we can select Flip Color Ramp. This is what we want. The flakes are metallic and the rest is paint. Now that we know the shader is working, we don't need the noise to be this large. To resemble the flakes a bit better, we can set the scale of the noise to a higher number. For the flakes I want the color to fall off to a purple. So I'm gonna add yet another color ramp. I'm sorry, I just love to work with them. They give so much control. I flip the ramp and drag this purple color to the black color slot in the converter node. I don't like to work with pure white and pure black. So I'll change it to slightly off-white. Preview this node by Ctrl-Shift clicking. If we now feed the phasing value through the color ramp, the flakes will color purple when the mesh bends around. Like I said, use the sliders to control how much of the white versus purple you want. Now we have the base color for our car paint and the base for the metallic flakes. Let's mix them together. Hold Ctrl-Shift, right click and drag to the second node. A green line indicates we're gonna mix them, and automatically a mix node appears. Preview the mix node, that is Ctrl-Shift clicking on the node. Now we got a vague mix between the two. To fix this, let's factor in the metallic map. The unflipped one to be specific. We connect everything up properly and take in its gloriousness. Now, we're not done yet. The flakes and the car paint share the same roughness value. Let's get our metallic map and feed it to the roughness here. To control this map, we're adding a color ramp. The metallic parts should be glossy, so keep them close to black. The car paint can be a bit rougher, so this can be dark gray or mid gray. To really show that the flakes are layered upon the base color, we're gonna add a bump node. Shift A, go to Vector and choose Bump. Get this metallic map again and feed it to the height value. Then, connect the bump node to the vector input of the principal. A bump map doesn't displace the mesh. It just fakes light hitting a bump, if you will. I like to set the strength to a lower value, same goes for the distance, 0.01. We could add a clear code here in the principal shader. That is fine. But I like to have more control over the look. So, we're gonna add a glossy node. Set the color to pure white, so it is most reflective. Dial the roughness back till we can barely notice it. Mix the two shaders like we did before. Hold Shift Ctrl, right click and drag from one node to the other. To determine the mix factor, we'll add in a new input. For now, let's preview its effect. Of course we can tweak the values here, but I like to add a ramp as well to get the color slightly more in the same range. That is our car paint shader. Let's frame it and hang it somewhere. No, seriously, Shift A, go to Layout and frame it. Make sure you make a big frame by dragging the edges out, grab all the nodes, quickly deselect the frame, and press G and place them in the frame. If you let go, they should snap right into it. We can even rename it and give it a cheerful color. With the frame selected, press T. In the Items tab on the right, rename the node. Then check this box and give it a color. To let you in on a little secret, I don't usually do this, but since there are people watching, I like to keep it clean. I'll make some more room to work. Cut the line between the car paint and the material output. Add a principal shader with the frame on it. This is gonna be Kevlar material. This will be a bit more straightforward because for this material we're gonna do a basic PBR setup. If we select the principal now, Ctrl T, we can add a series of nodes. The image texture, the mapping node and the texture coordinates. Quick disclaimer, I don't think I can give you this texture. I got this when I had a license for Substance Painter from the Substance Painter library. If you want to use the same texture, I suggest head over there. Maybe a trial version will get you there. But then again, any PBR texture will do. So you can also head over to ccotextures.com. They have amazing textures for free. If we preview this node, we see a pink color. Every time we see this, an alarm should go off. And not just because it isn't the prettiest, no. This means a texture is missing. Could be an incorrect path, or we just didn't add one yet. Like in this case. Add the base color texture from our PBR textures. This could be named color, base color, or albedo. Next, I'm gonna add the metallic texture map. For everything but the base color, we make sure to set the color space to non-color data, right here. We're gonna add the following textures quickly and connect them to the principled. Specular level, roughness map, anisotropy level, and the height map. For the last one, we want to make a new node. Go to Vector and Vector Displacement. Feed the height map into the vector input. To make this displacement work correctly, add a converter called Combine X by Z. Drag it in between the two nodes. And connect the height map to the Y. Where the bump map only faked the displacement, this node actually displaces the mesh. To set it up correct, we need to come to the Material tab on the right. Under Settings, we switch the displacement type from bump only to displacement and bump. Now connect the displacement node to the material output, like so. And watch how the mesh explodes. In this case, I set it to object space. And lower the strength by lowering the scale value here. We can see that the lag is displayed so far that it's moved past the selection outline here. To adjust for that, I'm going to set the mid-level to 0.2. The displacement is greatly dependent on the subdivision levels. The higher the subdivisions, the better the deformation will be. Keep in mind that this will drastically slow down everything you do. I select all the nodes and with H we shy them. What we need to understand is layering. It's important that we know techniques as mixing and masking, using every tool in our arsenal to make it as detailed as possible. After all, it's rarely the case that you find a complete PBR texture that's perfect for your model. The Kevlar texture came in a yellow color, but I like to set it to a different color. Maybe that's not realistic, but it fits better with my color scheme. Above the color texture, I'll add a color mix node. We can feed one of the two inputs the image texture and set a new color for the other one. I'm gonna abuse this texture because it comes closest to masking the yellow part. So I'll pick the metallic map and feed it into the mix vector right here. Now I can change the Kevlar to every color I need. If you don't have a map that can do this, pick the closest one and try to adjust it with a color ramp. We'll add a placeholder shader for the third material below the Kevlar. Quickly adjust some of the settings. We can do this later on in detail on our own. Finally, it's time to mix the shaders together. Ctrl-Shift right-click this shader and drag to the principal shader here. This made a mix node between the two. We're gonna import our RGB mask we made in the beginning. Now, to turn this clown's costume in a black and white map, all we need to do is Shift A, Converter and separate RGB. Drag that in between here and we got our mask. Factor that in the mix shader. Let's preview that. Oh, that got our shaders flipped. Simply drag this shader input to the one below and they will swap. The nice thing here is we can add our third material with the same texture. Let's see, this time we need G, as we can see here. Grab the G and feed it into the mix vector. Then preview this mix node. If we get closer, we see something strange. The Kevlar displacement is still visible on the car paint. We should fix that. Duplicate these nodes with Shift D, drag them over here, next to the height section of this shader. Then mix the height map with the separated RGB mask. Place it in the vector instead of the color input. The color should be a mid-gray, cause white being pushed out and black pushed in. Switch them around because the height map is inverted right now. Now let's preview the final shader. Using the same technique, I'll continue on the other materials. You can download the free project files to see what maps I baked out. What do you prefer, black and white maps or RGB maps? Let me know in the comments. For now, thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this. If you want to see more content in the future, subscribe to the channel. Also, you might like these other videos. As always, stay creative. See you next time. Ciao.